At 3 a.m., my brother sneaked my car keys while I was asleep. By morning, my brand new SUV was gone, wrecked on a weekend trip with his friends. When he got back, Mom said, "Don't blame him, he would never do that." I just smiled because the car he took. I spent my entire life being the responsible one, cleaning up messes and swallowing injustice. But when my golden child brother didn't just wreck my car, but tried to steal my entire identity with it, that's when I knew things were about to change, and not in his favor. See, I'm Lucas. I'm 26, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding things together in my family. It wasn't a title I asked for, it just stuck. Someone had to play the adult when the actual adults were too busy picking favorites. And their favorite? That would be my younger brother, Daniel. He's 22, a whirlwind of recklessness, impulsive decisions, and yet, somehow, completely untouchable in my parents' eyes. I honestly can't even count the times Daniel has gotten himself into hot water. Skipping classes, blowing through cash like it was Monopoly money, wrecking relationships left and right. And every single time, my parents would just smooth it over. Like it was just a cute little hiccup in his golden path. Meanwhile, if I so much as breathed in the wrong direction, I'd get the full lecture. Responsibility, Lucas. Save your money. Set a good example. I learned pretty fast that the rules in my family weren't actually rules. They were warnings. Warnings directed exclusively at me. While Daniel floated above it all, I'd hear things like, "Don't leave dishes in the sink, Lucas," while Daniel's plate sat crusting on the counter from last night's midnight snack. Or, "Don't drive too fast, Lucas. We can't afford accidents," while Daniel was getting pulled over for the third time and still walked away with nothing but a warning, all thanks to Dad's connections. It wasn't fair. It never was. But I got used to it. I had to. So, last year, when I finally landed my first decent job and had the means to actually treat myself, I did something big. I bought a brand new SUV. Nothing fancy, nothing over the top. Just something safe, reliable, and most importantly, mine. I'd been saving for years, driving my old beat-up sedan, while Daniel went through 3 different cars in 4 years because he just couldn't keep them intact. This SUV? It was my milestone. To me, it wasn't just a car. It was proof that I could build something for myself, something no one could take away. Of course, the moment I drove it home, Daniel was all over it. "Man, this is sick," he exclaimed, running his hands over the hood like it belonged to him. "We're definitely taking this on our next trip." I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but I saw the glint in his eyes. He wasn't admiring my car. He was staking a claim. Mom, standing nearby, chuckled. "Don't be greedy, Lucas. Let your brother enjoy it too." As if the thousands of dollars I'd spent meant nothing. As if all those late nights working overtime could be brushed aside because Daniel wanted to enjoy it. I made it crystal clear, no one drives it but me. My tone was firm, maybe firmer than I usually allowed myself to be around my family, but it had to be said. Daniel just smirked. That kind of smirk that makes you wonder if he's already planning to ignore you. Mom frowned at me like I was being unreasonable. But I stood my ground. After all, if I didn't protect what I earned, who would? Still, that night, I had a hard time sleeping. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly, but a gnawing sense that I couldn't fully trust the situation. I'd caught Daniel eyeing my keys before, and there had been times in the past when he'd borrowed things without asking. My laptop, my tools, even cash from my wallet when we were teenagers. He'd always deny it until I cornered him with proof. And even then, Mom would just say, "He's young. Let it go." Young or not, Daniel had a way of convincing everyone else that his actions didn't carry weight. But I knew better. I told myself I was overthinking. I tucked the keys under my pillow like I was guarding treasure. But somehow, in the haze of early morning hours, I must have let my guard down. Because when I woke up around 7 the next day, groggy and confused by the strange emptiness outside, my stomach dropped. My SUV wasn't in the driveway. At first, I thought it was stolen. The panic that hit me was sharp and immediate, my mind racing with insurance calls and police reports. But when I went inside to look for my keys, they were gone too. My heart sank as the reality pieced itself together. Daniel, The rage that hit me was almost overwhelming. It wasn't just about the car. It was the principle of it all. I'd worked for that SUV, guarded it, warned him not to touch it. And still, in the middle of the night, he'd taken what wasn't his. I stormed into the kitchen where Mom was already making breakfast, humming like nothing was wrong. "Where's Daniel?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked at me with that weary expression she reserved for when she thought I was overreacting. "He went on a weekend trip with some friends," she said, stirring her coffee. "Why?" My hands clenched. "He took my car. My SUV. The one I told him not to touch." She barely blinked. "Don't be ridiculous, Lucas. He wouldn't do that." It was like a slap in the face. The SUV was gone. The keys were gone. And still, she denied it. That familiar wave of disbelief and frustration crashed over me. For years, I'd been told to let things go, to swallow the unfairness. But this wasn't some dirty dish in the sink. This was my car. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she admitted what we both knew. Instead, I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. "The car is gone, Mom. He took it. Don't defend him this time." But she only sighed, patting my arm like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Lucas, stop blaming him. He would never do that." And in that moment, something shifted in me. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stood there, my chest tight with anger, but my face carefully calm. I smiled. Because while she brushed me off, I already knew something she didn't. The SUV Daniel had driven off with wasn't exactly the car he thought it was. And that secret was going to change everything. When I walked out of the kitchen that morning, Mom's words followed me like a curse. Asterisk, he would never do that. Asterisk, she said it with such conviction, as if denial could bend reality to her will. I knew better. The empty driveway outside was proof enough. But what stung wasn't just Daniel's betrayal. It was the way Mom refused to acknowledge it. Again. Always again. The hours crawled by with no word from him. I tried to distract myself, pacing around the house, sipping coffee that went cold in my hands. I kept replaying the same thoughts. The payments I had set up for the SUV, the long hours I'd worked, the sacrifices I'd made. That car wasn't a toy. It wasn't a shared family vehicle. And yet, that's exactly how Daniel was treating it. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I called his phone straight to voicemail. Texted him. No response. The silence wasn't surprising. It was strategic. Daniel knew that if he ignored me long enough, by the time he returned, Mom and Dad would have already smoothed things over, and I'd be painted as overly dramatic for still being upset. It was the same cycle I'd lived through for years. When Dad came home from work, I thought maybe he'd back me up. He's always been the quieter one in these family disputes, but I held out hope. I cornered him the second he walked in. "Dad, Daniel took my car. My SUV. He left at night and hasn't answered me all day." Dad didn't even flinch. He set his briefcase down and rubbed his temples. "Lucas, your brother's just blowing off steam. Don't make this into a big fight. He'll bring it back." I stared at him, floored. "Don't make this into a big fight? He stole my car, Dad. That is a big fight." "Lucas," his tone was low, a warning. "You're too rigid sometimes. You've got to learn to share. He's your brother." That word, share, ignited something bitter in me. Share. As if Daniel and I were equals in this. As if I hadn't paid every single dime for that car. As if my years of careful saving were somehow less important than Daniel's wins. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but it wasn't funny. It was suffocating. Later that evening, while I was sulking in my room, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but the walls in our house weren't exactly soundproof. "Lucas is always so uptight about these things," Mom muttered. "It's just a car." Dad sighed. "He'll get over it. Daniel's young. Let him enjoy himself while he can." The words stabbed deeper than I expected. It's just a car. No, it wasn't. It was independence. It was dignity. It was the one thing I could point to and say, I did this on my own. And in one night, Daniel had stripped me of it, with their blessing. 3 days passed. 3 days of no car, no word from Daniel, and a suffocating atmosphere at home where any mention of the SUV was met with silence or scolding. Mom even had the audacity to suggest, "Why don't you just use my car for now? Stop sulking." As if the problem was my attitude and not the fact that their golden child had stolen from me. Finally, on the 4th evening, I heard the familiar crunch of tires in the driveway. My pulse quickened as I rushed to the window. There it was, my SUV. Except it wasn't the same. The front bumper was cracked, the side mirror was dangling, and the shine I had polished just days ago was now dulled by streaks of mud and careless scratches. My chest tightened, fury rising like a tidal wave. Daniel stumbled out of the driver's seat, laughing with his friends as if nothing was wrong. He tossed the keys in the air, caught them, and pocketed them without a glance at me. My SUV looked like it had been through a battlefield, and all he did was grin. I stormed outside. "What did you do to my car?" Daniel turned, feigning innocence. "Relax, man. We just took it for a spin. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I stepped closer, pointing at the cracked bumper. "Look at this. You wrecked it." He shrugged. "It's just a scratch. Don't be so dramatic." His friends snickered behind him, fueling his smugness. Mom came rushing out, drawn by the commotion, and before I could even get a word out, she was already taking his side. "Lucas, stop yelling at your brother. You'll scare the neighbors." "Mom, look at the car." My voice cracked with anger. "He destroyed it." Her gaze flickered to the SUV, but instead of outrage, there was only mild disapproval, like I'd pointed out a smudge on the wall. "It's not that bad. Cars can be fixed. What matters is that Daniel is home safe." Safe, that was her priority. Not the thousands of dollars worth of damage. Not the complete disregard for my boundaries. Just Daniel's safety. Dad joined us a few minutes later, his face tightening at the sight of the SUV, but even then, his words betrayed the bias. "Daniel, you need to be more careful," he said in a measured tone before turning to me. "Lucas, don't blow this out of proportion. We'll figure something out." Figure something out, that was code for Lucas will swallow the cost. While Daniel walks away unscathed. That night, Daniel swaggered into the house like a conquering hero, boasting about the trip to anyone who would listen. He left pizza boxes and empty soda cans in the living room, treating the house like his personal dumping ground while Mom doted on him, asking if he needed money for gas or food. I sat there, my insides churning, invisible in my own home. But beneath the hurt and anger, something else started to take root. A quiet, simmering resolve. I'd played the role of the responsible one my whole life. I'd taken the punches, swallowed the unfairness, and told myself to endure. But this was different. Because Daniel didn't just cross a line, he bulldozed through it. And Mom and Dad weren't just blind, they were complicit. As I sat in my room that night, staring at the dented hood through the window, I realized this wasn't going to be swept under the rug like all the other times. Not this time. And when I smiled to myself, it wasn't because I forgave him. It was because I knew something none of them did. The car Daniel thought he ruined wasn't the leverage he believed it to be. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory. Every word I spoke was twisted into nagging, every justified frustration dismissed as overreacting. Meanwhile, Daniel strutted around as if he had earned the SUV himself, boasting to his friends about his ride, like it wasn't purchased with years of my sacrifices. For a while, I tried to bite my tongue, to convince myself that maybe I could fix the car, move on, and create some distance between us. But then the betrayal came deeper, sharper than anything I'd expected. It started with the insurance. I had called to report the damage because, frankly, there was no way I could cover the cost of repairs out of pocket. My premiums weren't cheap, but that was the point. I had coverage for situations like this. Or so I thought. When the representative pulled up my file, there was confusion on her end. "Sir," she said carefully, "are you aware that a claim was already filed for your vehicle last night?" My grip tightened on the phone. "What?" "No, I didn't file anything." "Yes, it was filed under your policy by a Daniel Carter," she replied, checking again. The room spun around me. Daniel had used my information, my insurance, to try and pass off the damage as his own claim. Worse, the adjuster explained that the story didn't add up. He said he was the primary driver on the vehicle. We flagged it because that didn't match our records. I hung up the phone with a sickening realization. It wasn't just about the car anymore. Daniel wasn't content with wrecking it. He wanted to rewrite reality to make it his. He was trying to take ownership of something he had no right to, dragging my finances and credibility down with him. When I confronted him, his reaction made my blood boil. He was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, legs kicked up like a king on his throne. "You used my insurance?" I asked, voice low and trembling. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, chill out. It's not a big deal. Asterisk, not a big deal. Asterisk, you filed a fraudulent claim in my name. Do you understand what could happen if..." He finally looked at me then, eyes narrowing in that infuriating way. "Lucas, you're so uptight. You've got no idea how the world works. Nobody cares who files what. I was fixing the problem for you." Fixing the problem. That was his justification. My hands shook as I clenched them into fists. Not out of fear, but out of the sheer effort it took not to explode. When I turned to Mom and Dad, desperate for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the gravity of what he'd done, their response was the nail in the coffin. Mom crossed her arms, glaring at me. "Lucas, stop making everything into a drama. He was just trying to help. Why can't you be more like your brother? Relaxed, easygoing." Dad nodded, adding, "You're overreacting again. This is exactly what I meant about you needing to share more. You're too possessive. Asterisk, share more." Possessive. Asterisk, their words twisted the knife deeper. They weren't just defending him anymore. They were vilifying me for wanting respect, for wanting my boundaries, my property, my hard work recognized. That night, I found out just how far their favoritism could go. I was in my room, door cracked open, when I overheard Mom and Dad talking with Daniel in the kitchen. Their voices carried down the hall. "Don't worry about your brother," Mom said soothingly. "He'll cool off. He's always been dramatic." "Exactly," Dad chimed in. "And, honestly, Daniel, maybe it would be better if you just used the SUV. You're the one who goes out, has fun, lives life. Lucas doesn't need it the way you do." I froze. The air left my lungs. They weren't just excusing him. They were openly suggesting that my SUV, my first real achievement, should belong to him. Daniel chuckled. "See, you get it. He doesn't even know how to enjoy it. It'd be better off with me anyway." The sound of their laughter was like a hammer cracking against the fragile shell of whatever trust one still had in them. That was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't about fairness anymore or hoping they'd see reason. No, this was betrayal in its purest form. My parents had chosen their golden child openly, blatantly, at my expense. And Daniel, he wasn't satisfied with stealing. He wanted to erase me from the picture entirely. I sat in the dark of my room that night, heart pounding, teeth clenched, every nerve in my body alight with anger. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the responsible older brother. I felt like someone betrayed enough to break, someone finally ready to stop swallowing the unfairness and start plotting. Because they had no idea that I wasn't powerless. They thought I was the predictable one, the quiet one who would always back down. But what they didn't know, what Daniel especially didn't know, was that the SUV he had laid claim to wasn't just a shiny toy. It was a trap waiting to be sprung. And soon he'd find out exactly what that meant. After that night, the house felt like it wasn't mine anymore. Every time I walked into the kitchen or the living room, I was reminded that I was the outsider under my own roof. Mom and Dad's laughter with Daniel. The way he lounged in the SUV's driver's seat like it had been his all along. The dismissive glances they threw me whenever I dared to voice my frustration. It was suffocating. The worst part wasn't even the damage to the car or the fraudulent insurance claim. It was the erosion of trust. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I would never be seen as anything more than the strict, uptight brother. Meanwhile, Daniel, who crashed my SUV and nearly ruined my finances, was still the carefree son they admired. That realization hollowed me out in a way I hadn't felt before. The following week was brutal. Daniel took the SUV again without asking, parading around town like it was his personal trophy. My phone buzzed with friends sending me photos. Daniel parked sloppily outside bars. Daniel revving the engine in crowded streets. Daniel boasting about his new ride to anyone who would listen. Each photo felt like another twist of the knife. Not only because he was humiliating me publicly, but because I couldn't even correct the narrative. If I told people the truth, I knew he'd spin it, and Mom and Dad would back him. That's how it always went. I tried to talk to them again, one last time. It was after dinner when Daniel had tossed his dirty plate into the sink and walked off without so much as rinsing it. I stayed behind with my parents, hoping maybe, just maybe, reason would prevail if I spoke calmly. Mom, Dad, I began, my voice trembling with effort. I can't keep doing this. That car is mine. I worked for it. Daniel doesn't respect it, and I need you to stop enabling him. If he keeps this up, he's going to destroy more than just the SUV. He's going to drag me down with him. I thought the vulnerability in my tone would get through to them. But instead, Mom pursed her lips, shaking her head slowly. Lucas, you're exhausting. All you ever do is complain. Why can't you be grateful your brother is even around? One day, when he's successful, you'll be proud. Proud, that word echoed in my skull like a cruel joke. Proud of what? Proud of a brother who stole from me, wrecked my car, and laughed in my face? Dad chimed in, too. His voice softer, but no less dismissive. You've got to loosen up, son. You're making mountains out of molehills. If you keep this up, you'll push your family away. Push my family away. The irony of that nearly made me laugh out loud. They'd already chosen. I was already on the outside. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the weight of their words pressing down on me. I thought about the years I had sacrificed to be the responsible one. The nights I stayed in to save money while Daniel blew cash on parties. The times I bailed him out of trouble even when I knew he deserved the consequences. And now here I was, branded as the villain in my own story. It was my rock bottom. The next morning, Daniel swaggered into my room without knocking, tossing the SUV keys onto my desk. By the way, you're low on gas. You might want to fill up before you drive it again, he said with a grin. Oh, and my buddies love the ride. They said I should bring it next weekend, too. He walked out before I could even respond, his laughter trailing behind him. I stared at the keys, my blood boiling, my chest tight. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not into an explosion of anger, but into something colder, quieter. I stopped arguing, stopped pleading, stopped wasting my breath. If they wanted me to be the villain, then I'd play the part, but on my own terms. I realized there was no point fighting for their recognition anymore. I wasn't going to win a battle against years of favoritism. Instead, I started planning. I began researching late into the nights. Insurance loopholes, property laws, ways to protect myself financially from Daniel's recklessness. I dug through my paperwork, set up new passwords, and quietly began moving pieces into place. I didn't announce anything. I didn't slam doors or make threats. Outwardly, I played along. Smiled faintly at Mom's digs, nodded at Dad's warnings, let Daniel gloat without resistance. But inside, I was done. Done being the punching bag. Done being the responsible one who never fought back. Because what Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the SUV wasn't just a car. It was more than a vehicle. It was leverage. And the way he had entangled himself with it, the reckless driving, the fraudulent claim, the entitlement, it had all given me something I hadn't had before, power. And I was going to use it. After I hit my lowest point, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy or a movie-style moment of transformation. It was quieter than that, like a candle being lit in a dark room. I realized that if I kept begging for respect from people who had no interest in giving it, I'd be stuck in this loop forever. So instead of trying to pull them toward me, I started pulling myself away. The first step was distance. Not physical, not yet, but mental. I stopped letting their words sink into me like knives. When Mom scolded me for complaining too much, I just smiled faintly. When Dad told me to share more, I nodded without arguing. When Daniel bragged about his SUV, I let him boast, knowing every word he said was digging him deeper into a pit he didn't even see. The less I resisted outwardly, the less they noticed what I was doing behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my career. I'd been working in IT for a mid-sized firm for about 2 years, mostly quiet and reliable in my role, never really pushing for more. But now, I threw myself into it. Late nights that used to feel exhausting became purposeful. Projects that others avoided, I volunteered for. My manager started noticing. He asked me to lead a small team on a pilot project, and I poured everything into it. By the end of that quarter, not only had we finished early, but our work saved the company thousands. My manager recommended me for a promotion, and just like that, my salary jumped. The money that used to trickle now felt like a steady flow. And for the first time, I saw a future where I wasn't shackled to my family's approval or to Daniel's shadow. With the extra income, I made some strategic moves. I opened a separate account, one my parents didn't know about. Every bonus, every overtime payment, every bit of freelance work I took on the side went straight into it. I also started making connections outside of my family bubble, colleagues who respected me, mentors who saw potential, even a few friends who understood the grind I was on. Slowly, my world began to expand beyond the suffocating walls of favoritism I'd grown up in. And the SUV? Oh, I didn't neglect that piece of the puzzle. After Daniel's fraudulent claim, I quietly contacted my insurance company and set stricter controls on the policy. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Mom or Dad. Instead, I documented everything, photos of the damage, emails with the insurance rep, even timestamps from neighbors who saw Daniel driving recklessly. Every piece of evidence went into a neat folder, digital and physical. At the same time, I installed a tracker in the SUV. Again, no one knew. Every time Daniel took the car out, I had a record of where he went, how far, and how long. It was tedious at first, watching his trail of irresponsibility, but I knew it was valuable. He thought he was untouchable, but I was quietly building a case. Brick by brick. Life outside the house began to look brighter. I treated myself not with flashy things, but with small victories that were mine alone. A new laptop bought outright. Dinners with colleagues where I could laugh without feeling judged. A gym membership that became my outlet for stress. My health improved. My confidence grew. For once, I wasn't the background character in my own life. And the more I pulled myself up, the more I noticed Daniel unraveling. The SUV wasn't enough for him. He wanted more attention, more money, more indulgence. He started borrowing from friends, bragging about investments he didn't understand, and throwing parties that left the house trashed. Mom and Dad still defended him, of course, but I could see the cracks forming. His recklessness wasn't charming anymore. It was becoming costly. I stayed quiet, patient, letting him dig deeper, letting my parents excuse more and more until even they looked tired. One evening, while Daniel was out with the SUV again, I overheard Mom on the phone with a relative. Her voice was tight, almost defensive. Daniel just needs time. Yes, we know he's made mistakes, but he'll grow out of it. Lucas? Oh, he's fine. Always fine. Always fine. That phrase stuck with me. They saw me as the one who needed nothing, who absorbed every blow without complaint. And in a way, they weren't wrong anymore. I didn't need their validation. I was building something stronger than their approval. A foundation they couldn't shake. But the irony was, the stronger I grew, the weaker their golden boy looked in comparison. He didn't even notice it yet, but the balance of power was shifting slowly, quietly, inevitably. Because while he played the role of the carefree brother, I was becoming something else entirely. Someone with proof, with stability, with leverage. And the day would come when he'd find out just how much power I had gained, using the very SUV he thought he had stolen from me. The months that followed felt like I was living a double life. On the surface, nothing had changed. Daniel still strutted around with his hollow confidence, tossing my SUV keys like they were his birthright. Mom still coddled him. Dad still brushed off my concerns. And I still played the role of the quiet, responsible one who didn't need anything. But beneath that calm exterior, I was stacking cards, building something far more dangerous than they realized. The promotion at work opened doors I hadn't expected. With my new role, I gained access not only to more resources, but also to connections, financial advisors, legal contacts, even a colleague who used to work in fraud prevention for an insurance company. I didn't blurt out my situation right away. Instead, I listened. I asked questions. And slowly, I began to understand just how deep the consequences could go for someone who filed fraudulent insurance claims or repeatedly drove recklessly under someone else's policy. One conversation in particular stuck with me. Over coffee, my colleague, let's call him Mark, was telling me about a case where someone had been flagged for misusing a car that wasn't theirs. The paper trail is everything, he said. Emails, GPS data, receipts, photos. You piece it together, and eventually even the most untouchable person crumbles. I remember sipping my coffee slowly, hiding the small smile tugging at my lips. A paper trail. That's exactly what I had been building for months. Every reckless trip Daniel took in the SUV was recorded by the tracker I'd installed. Every dent, every scratch, every receipt from gas stations he used my card to fill up with, I had them cataloged. I even had text messages from him bragging to his friends about his ride. Screenshots saved in multiple folders. To anyone else, it might have looked obsessive. To me, it was preparation. Meanwhile, Daniel's arrogance was ballooning. He wasn't content just borrowing the SUV. He started talking about upgrading it as if it were his to modify. One night at dinner, he casually mentioned to our parents, I was thinking of trading it in for something sportier. Maybe a coupe. I nearly choked on my food. Excuse me, Daniel smirked. Relax, man. I'm just saying. This SUV isn't really my style. Too family-friendly. Don't you think I'd look better in something with, a bit more edge? Mom laughed. Well, he's not wrong. You've always been the practical one, Lucas. Daniel needs something more fitting for his personality. I looked between them, stunned, my fork frozen in midair. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They were entertaining the fantasy that my car was Daniel's to trade. That night, I realized something crucial. Daniel wasn't just entitled. He was careless with his entitlement. He believed so completely in his golden child immunity that he'd started saying the quiet part out loud. That was dangerous for him and valuable for me. Around that same time, I stumbled onto another piece of leverage I hadn't expected. My company had begun offering optional car allowances to employees in managerial positions, an incentive to ensure reliable transportation. I applied, and within weeks, I had approval. It wasn't enough to cover a brand new vehicle outright, but combined with my savings, it gave me options. Serious options. That's when the idea solidified in my mind. I didn't need to fight for recognition anymore. I didn't even need to fight for the SUV. What I needed was to let Daniel, and by extension my parents, dig deep enough into their delusions that when the truth finally landed, it would crush them under its weight. I quietly met with a lawyer, someone recommended by Mark, and laid out a hypothetical scenario. What if someone repeatedly damaged your property, filed false claims, and tried to assert ownership? The lawyer raised an eyebrow but didn't laugh. If you can prove it, you'd have grounds not just for financial restitution, but also for charges, depending on the extent. That night, I walked back into the house with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Mom was nagging me about how I never smiled anymore. Daniel was bragging about his weekend plans, and Dad was glued to the TV. I just nodded, smiled faintly, and went upstairs because I knew something none of them did. I was no longer just the responsible older brother. I was someone with documented proof, legal advice, and a financial cushion that freed me from needing their approval. And most importantly, I was patient. Daniel thought he had all the power because he had the keys. But the keys didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the trap I was building around him, one he couldn't see until it was too late. Sooner or later, he'd walk right into it. The breaking point came on a Friday night, one of those evenings where the house was filled with the sound of Daniel's laughter and the clatter of his friends taking over the living room. I had just come home from a long day at work, productive, fulfilling, but exhausting. And the last thing I wanted was another reminder of how little respect I had in this house. Yet, there it was, Daniel tossing the SUV keys in the air while bragging about his plans for the weekend. "We're taking it upstate," he announced proudly, his friends nodding along. "Going to hit the lake, maybe camp out. This thing's perfect for hauling all our gear." I froze in the doorway. He didn't even bother to look at me as he said it. Didn't even acknowledge that the car he was parading around was mine, not his. My SUV had gone from being my achievement to being his party accessory. And my parents sat there, grinning like it was cute. That was when I knew it was time. The trap I'd been building for months was ready, and Daniel had just volunteered to step straight into it. Earlier that week, I'd met with the lawyer again. With all the documentation I'd gathered, the tracker logs, photos, insurance correspondence, even witness accounts from neighbors, it wasn't hard to build a case. But instead of rushing to file something immediately, I held on to the evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to make the damage undeniable. And this weekend trip? It was the perfect storm. The morning they left, I didn't argue. I didn't demand the keys back. I simply smiled, wished Daniel and his friends a safe trip, and watched as he drove away, music blasting, laughter spilling out of the SUV's open windows. Inside, I felt a calmness settle over me, the kind of calm that comes when you know you've already won. While they were gone, I set the rest of the plan in motion. I sent the tracker data and photos to my lawyer, including Daniel's itinerary, which I'd gleaned from overhearing his loud conversations. I even had screenshots of his texts bragging about borrowing the car for the weekend. The lawyer advised me to call the insurance company directly, not to file another claim, but to formally report unauthorized use and fraud tied to Daniel's previous attempt. "Once you make the call," my lawyer said, "you're no longer the one chasing the problem. The system will chase him." And so I did. Calm, polite, precise. I laid out everything to the insurance rep. By the end of the call, they confirmed Daniel's name was already flagged in their system. "Thank you for confirming, Mr. Carter," the rep said. "Rest assured, this will be escalated." By Sunday evening, when the SUV finally pulled back into the driveway, it was in even worse shape than before. A cracked tail light, mud caked along the tires, fast food wrappers spilling out of the back. Daniel stumbled out, sunburned and smug, his friends laughing like they just returned from a victory lap. "Man, this thing is a beast." Daniel grinned, slapping the hood. "Don't worry, bro. I'll get it washed tomorrow." I didn't respond with anger this time. I simply smiled, calm, measured, almost amused. "Glad you enjoyed yourself." That night, while Daniel crashed in his room and my parents hummed with their usual pride, I sat quietly at my desk. I pulled up the tracker app, downloaded the weekend's data, and sent it to my lawyer with one final note. Asterisk, he's crossed the line again. Proceed. Asterisk, the next few days unfolded with a strange sort of satisfaction. A letter arrived addressed to me, but when I opened it, it might as well have been written directly to Daniel. The insurance company was formally investigating fraud and unauthorized use tied to my vehicle. The words were heavy, official, the kind of language you couldn't wave off with a laugh or a shrug. I didn't show Daniel. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the letter neatly into my folder of evidence, waiting. But my revenge wasn't just about legal consequences. It was about shifting the balance of power. At work, I'd finalized my car allowance paperwork, and within a week, I was approved for a new vehicle through the company program. A fresh start. And here's the best part. I deliberately didn't trade in the SUV. No, I kept it under my name, fully documented, battered as it was, because it wasn't just a car anymore. It was Exhibit A. When Daniel tried to take the keys again that weekend, I let him hold them in his hand for a moment before calmly saying, "Actually, the SUV is off limits now. Company policy. I'll be driving the new one. Insurance doesn't allow unauthorized drivers anymore." His grin faltered. "What do you mean?" "I've been driving it for months." "Exactly," I said, meeting his eyes. "And that's over." He laughed, trying to brush it off, but there was a flicker of doubt in his expression, the first crack in his smug facade. Mom swooped in, of course, scolding me for being selfish and telling me to stop holding grudges. But this time, I didn't argue. I just smiled and walked out with the new keys in my pocket. Because the real blow hadn't landed yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just knock Daniel down. It would shake the pedestal my parents had built for him to the ground. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves, each one stronger than the last, until even my parents, so determined to keep Daniel untouchable, were forced to face reality. The first wave came when the insurance company called. I made sure to take the call on speaker while sitting in the living room, my parents and Daniel all within earshot. The representative's tone was calm but firm. They had concluded their investigation, and Daniel's fraudulent claim had been flagged as attempted insurance fraud. Because of the unauthorized use and repeated damage tied to my vehicle, they were placing restrictions on my policy and warning of possible legal escalation if it happened again. Mom gasped. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Daniel paled, though he tried to mask it with a smirk. It's just insurance people. They bluff all the time, but his voice cracked ever so slightly. The second wave hit when I finally revealed the folder I had been keeping. I laid it out on the dining room table like a case file. Photos of the damage, tracker logs showing Daniel's late-night joyrides, screenshots of his texts bragging about the car, and copies of the letters from the insurance company. Each page landed with a slap against the wood, and with every slap, my parents' excuses grew thinner. This is harassment, Mom tried at first. You're digging into his life like some detective. No, I replied evenly, looking her dead in the eye. This is proof. Proof you've ignored for months. Daniel snatched at the papers, flipping through them in disbelief. You were spying on me? I was protecting myself, I said calmly. From you. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt in that house. For the first time, there were no quick excuses, no laughter to brush it off, just a wall of evidence they couldn't climb over. The third wave came harder still. A few weeks later, Daniel was pulled over while driving a friend's car, reckless speeding, expired registration. With his name already flagged in the insurance system, the officer didn't just let him off with a warning this time. He got slapped with fines and mandatory court appearances. When he came home fuming, Mom tried to comfort him, but I could see the cracks spreading wider. Their golden boy was no longer untouchable. The system had its eye on him now, and there was nothing they could say to shield him. As for me, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. I simply lived my life. With my new company car allowance, I drove a fresh vehicle that Daniel couldn't touch. My promotion came through officially, and with it, a new apartment downtown. When I packed my things, my parents begged me to reconsider. Though their pleas weren't really about me. They were about losing the son who kept the house afloat while their favorite spiraled out of control. I moved out quietly. No dramatic fights, no slammed doors, just a calm exit from the battlefield I had been forced to grow up on. Months later, I returned, not to live, but to visit, pulling up in my new car, sharp suit, fresh from work. The SUV still sat in their driveway, battered and unused, a monument to the months of denial and betrayal. Daniel stepped outside, thinner, wearier, his bravado dimmed. Mom and Dad followed, their faces lined with a shame they couldn't quite voice. Lucas, Dad said slowly. Maybe we should have listened sooner. I studied them. The same people who had dismissed me, belittled me, made me invisible in my own home. And for the first time, I didn't feel the desperate urge for their approval. I didn't need their validation anymore. I gave them a small smile. It's fine. I just wanted you to see the truth for yourselves. And as I turned to leave, Daniel muttered under his breath, bitter but broken, you set me up. I paused, glanced back at him, and let the words land like the final blow. No, Daniel, you set yourself up. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. The look on his face, the dawning realization that his shield was gone, that his parents couldn't save him anymore, was worth every sleepless night, every quiet plan I had laid. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind the broken pedestal they had built for their golden boy. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked, responsible son. I was the one who walked away with dignity, proof, and freedom. And that was the moment I knew